And thanks for staying with us here on News Talk. I'm Brianne Carter with you on this Wednesday. Well, the court-martial is underway for accused Fort Hood killer Nidal Hasan. The 2009 shooting at the Fort Hood military base killed 13 and wounded more than 30 others. In court yesterday, Hasan told the military jury the quote, "Evidence will clearly show I am the shooter." Hasan, who is representing himself, declined to cross-examine most witnesses, including some of the victims who survived. Well, joining us now by phone with more on this case, former Army Judge Advocate, General Corps Attorney Greg Rinckey. Greg, thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
So let's start out with the very beginning of this. He starts his opening statements and says, "The evidence will show I am the shooter." Certainly not a common start to a case like this.
No, absolutely not, but not really that shocking when somebody represents themselves.
Why do you think that he took that option?
Well, I think that he believes that what he did was some sort of religious jihad, and I think he wants to explain the rationale of why he did what he did.
And so far, we haven't heard much from him, not cross-examining many of the witnesses, not saying much when allowed to ask questions in this case. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, he's not a legally trained professional. I think he's going to try and make some points that he wants to get out. I don't think he really understands the point of cross-examination. So not very surprising when somebody represents themselves.
And I believe the military rules forbid guilty pleas in a case like this. But because of what we're seeing here, do you see that perhaps ever changing?
I do not. I still think that the government needs to go through the motion of proving the case beyond a reasonable doubt in any case where the death penalty is a possibility.
Looking forward into this as we continue with the witnesses and with what we saw yesterday, do you expect that we will see more of the same in terms of his demeanor, in terms of the lack of questioning, the lack of statements?
I think it's going to continue throughout the trial that way.
On a background note, in terms of the length of where we got to this point, it happened in 2009. What are your thoughts on why it took so long for us to get to this point?
Well, in any case where there's so many victims in a death penalty case, there's a lot of investigation. Also, there was a lot of defense delay. I mean, the defense knew that death penalty was on the table here,
right.
So defense attorneys are going to try and delay the case as long as possible by filing various motions and interlocutory appeals, which they did in this case.
We heard a bunch of different testimony yesterday, a number of people coming forward, and we heard, I believe it was someone from the gun store who came out and talked about the amount of ammunition that he had and that he didn't want to answer any questions about why he was getting that amount of ammunition. In so many cases where we see something like this and we look back to the what ifs or what could have been done, should this have been a red flag for someone? Should we be looking more at purchases like this? Obviously, when we see a mass shooting to this degree, we look at different things in light of what had happened. Should this have been something that we should have seen ahead of time?
I think it's hard to predict these types of mass shooters. I mean, someone within the military who holds a security clearance is an officer. Is there some question that his superiors maybe should have seen some change in his personality or radicalization of him? Yeah, absolutely, and I think it bears closer scrutiny in the future.
And in terms of, obviously, this being a different case than just a civilian versus someone in the military, take us a little bit through the differences there and the steps that we'll be seeing with this obviously being, someone who was in the military.
Well, one of the big differences is panel members can ask questions, and I think we'll see that happening in this case, is the panel members asking questions of the witnesses. That's very rare in civilian trials and often is not allowed.
Right.
Panel members are in the military are not called, they're not juries, they're panel members. They're also very highly educated. Most of the panel members in this case, they're all officers, so they all have college degrees. They're going to ask some very, tough questions. They're also going to be very involved in the case. Not that civilian panels or juries are not, but sometimes civilian juries are a little bit less educated. So you're going to see a little bit of a difference just in the type of questions and the analytical responses you're going to get from the panel. But still, proof beyond a reasonable doubt, they have to prove. It has to be unanimous in order for the government to get the death penalty.
Some people have commented about his appearance, of what we have seen him looking like there in court, and not typical for what you would see someone in the military appearing and their normal appearance of what they look like when in uniform. What can you say about what are the thoughts as to why this is?
Well, I mean, he won on an interlocutory appeal the ability to keep his beard. I mean, that's very uncommon in the military to have someone appearing with a beard. I understand he's appearing in his fatigues and also in a wheelchair.
Right.
Usually they're in their Class A's uniform with all their ribbons and such. So I think that's partially due to his medical condition, and I'm sure the judge will probably give a cautionary instruction as to not take any inference from that.
What should people be looking at in the future moving ahead from this case? Obviously, we have a ways to go until we get to the final points of this case, but moving forward from this and listening to testimony from it, listening to the case, people who are following it closely, what do you think should be the takeaways from this?
Well, I mean, I think what we're going to be looking at, what's going to be interesting is to see is the victims that were shot themselves, if they're going to be cross-examined by Major Hasan. I mean, I think that's something that we saw on the Long Island Railroad shooting, where Colin Ferguson was he represented himself and was cross-examining the victims that he had shot, and basically asked them, "Do you see the shooter in the courtroom today?" And they pointed at him and said, "Yeah, it was you." I think that, in a certain sense, for some of the victims that were shot, I think it'll be a good thing for them. For some of them, it's almost like they're being victimized a second time because now they're being cross-examined by the person that shot them. I think that's something to look at and very unique in this type of situation.
What about the situation that some of them were hoping sort of to get the chance to say that, and then he has chosen not to cross-examine? What does that say to those that have sort of waited for their day in court to be able to talk about this and then not to be questioned by him?
Well, the government is still going to allow them to get their story out. And
right.
The government counsel is still going to say, "Do you see the shooter in here? Can you point them out?" So they're still going to have their day in court.
Moving forward from this, the lessons we should take away, not specifically from this case, but from what we saw happen in 2009 and moving forward to protect our military, who are doing everything they can to protect us every single day? Yeah,
I mean, absolutely. This is a case that causes a grave concern that we had one of our own turning on our own soldiers and shooting them. So, unique case for the military system.
Specifically, what do you think that should be put in place that hasn't been already?
Well, I mean, I think we need to take a closer look at people that hold security clearances. You need to take a closer look at when people are starting to become radicalized. I mean, if there's warning signs going up, the military has the ability to command direct people into a mental health evaluation. Looking back in retrospect, should that have been done? Probably.
And in terms of a sign, a lot of people had said, obviously, there should have been something that his superior perhaps should have noticed. Is that always going to be the case, though, with anyone who knows someone who has served in the military knows they're, very upright, very professional, and that's sort of instilled from day one and moving forward? Would they be able to detect and see if, in fact, something like what is alleged here in terms of a sort of change of heart, a change of mind, is actually happening?
No, I mean, we're not going to be able to predict this with everyone. I mean, it's the same thing with suicide. Someone you think that is living the perfect life, happy, and they kill themselves, and you say there's no warning signs. So it's not that simple.
As an attorney watching this and watching it play out there, what really are your thoughts on what we've seen as day one, and really, is this par for the course of what you expected to see and what you expect to see over the next couple of days?
I expected Major Hasan to be more involved in his defense.
Okay.
I expected him to try and get more of his theory out, be more involved in cross-examination. But you never really know what goes through people's minds when they represent themselves. Sometimes they're overwhelmed. Sometimes they don't know how to ask the questions. So it is kind of shocking that he's not more involved in asking the questions on cross-examination.
Something we'll have to continue to watch as we move forward, and so does this military trial. I want to thank you so much for joining us here on News Talk.
My pleasure.